All right. Welcome, everybody. We're here, episode 2 of 2026, Merge Mississippi podcast. Thanks for joining us. I have with me today Blake Bartlum. Let's see, senior at Northwest Rankin High School, young Christian conservative. Blake, you've done some work with CCMS. Helped co-founded Merge Mississippi. You've done some political work in the past. You're super involved in things going on in the area now. Lacrosse, didn't know that till today. That's pretty awesome. So man, I'm glad you're able to hop on tonight. I know you're pretty fluid in a lot of this stuff, and we have a lot to talk about, a lot to cover tonight. We may not get into everything, but we're probably going to make this a 2 to 3 part show just to kind of be able to have some conversation about what's going on in the area. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna turn it over to you for a minute, just to
Yeah.
kind of recap a little bit. Well, first of all, tonight we'll talk about just an overview, just kind of a recap of CCMS and 2025 and kind of what that entailed, some wins along the way for CCMS, kind of some plans for 2026. Obviously, Merge being one of the bigger program projects that we're working on, and we'll discuss that a little bit, just kind of an overall agenda on what we have going on, a vision, kind of some of the activities we'll have throughout the year, Lord willing. And then we'll talk about some of the outreach plans as well. We'll cover the governor's race a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that. We will also talk about Trump in Venezuela and just kind of some of the recent revelations and updates as of this month. Obviously, that took place earlier this month, Operation, in Venezuela. But we'll talk about kind of what's transpired recently. And then one of the hot topics that we're seeing going on in the state right now is school choice. There's been a lot going on, a lot in the news, a lot on social media. Everybody kind of has their input on it. So we'll talk about what we kind of see as some pros and cons. We'll talk about a little bit just kind of what people are saying, and then obviously what we know. I'm not going to claim to be an expert about it. This is a 550 something page bill.
Yeah.
Um, some people are calling it kind of an omnibus bill. There is a lot in there, but I think we can kind of at least pull some important info from it, and then we'll also the whole point of this is to try to tie all that back biblically and just kind of what we see transpiring from these bills, a little bit about that, and then also about what's going on just kind of in the 2026 legislative session. So we'll hop right into it, man. How you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. Very busy with school and everything, but glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you. And if you would,
Yeah.
just kind of give us a rundown, just kind of 2025 and CCMS. I know we talked about it a little bit last time, but we'll just hear
Mhm.
from a different perspective on kind of what went on and what kind of some of the plans are for this upcoming year.
Yeah, so 2025 was a very ambitious year for the Conservative Coalition of Mississippi. We had just come off of 2024, where President Trump won in a landslide victory, and that sort of gave us the time in between the 2024 election and then the 2027 state elections, to sort of get a good foundation for how the conservative coalition can grow. And that is exactly what we did. We had some very key notable speakers: Commissioner Andy Gibson, State Auditor Shad White, uh, and then some other candidates and people who were talking about bills that were going on in the state came and spoke. The Conservative Coalition was able to grow its membership by, I think, at least a few hundred and possibly 1,000 over the course of the last year. And the biggest thing that we did, though, this year is we started the Conservative Coalition of Mississippi PAC. And so what that is it separates the Conservative Coalition, which is a 501c3, and then you were able to have the C4, which is the PAC, which allows the Conservative Coalition to raise money from the PAC and then send that money out to candidates, endorse candidates, stuff like that. And they were able to endorse, I believe it was 4 candidates, and I'm pretty sure we went, I think at least 2 for 4 or 3 for 4, I can't remember. But Senator Don Hartness is the most notable of those names, who took over Senate District 42 down there near Hattiesburg. and that's just one of the many things that we were able to accomplish this year. And that's really been the key word for 2025 was ambition, and the conservative coalition stood up to that word, and we plan to carry it into 2026.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's really great. All the traction that conservative coalition has. I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and what's really, I don't want to say missing, but we see a big gap, and I think a lot of the Republican Party and the conservatives in Mississippi, there I want to say there's about an 80-20% split. I don't know why those numbers come to my head, but it's just kind of like there's a lot of people in Mississippi that don't maybe feel like they're heard or part of the GOP and just kind of what they're doing. Not slamming them in any kind of way. A lot of them are kind of leading a lot of the charges, and don't get me wrong, they're the ones up there making a lot of these decisions. But I think that there has just kind of been this split throughout some of the state, and you know what? I saw that split. I think you saw that split. I think what happened last year with Charlie Kirk just kind of woke a lot of people up and kind of got people thinking about, what, Trump got elected. So, a lot of people just kind of stopped paying attention, thinking like, okay, our problems are taken care of. We've got the president we want in office. And then you saw things kind of start to fizzle out. People just kind of, I think, kind of assume that, well, we don't really have to pay as much attention anymore. And then, they started still not being really satisfied with, I guess, what was going on. And we'll just use Mississippi as an example because we live here, and what's going on with the state and some of the moves in the legislature, and still people feel a little bit disconnected. So that'll kind of jump us into merge, and just kind of, while we started this, originally stand the gap, because the whole point was obviously calling people to responsibility, calling them to stand up for those that maybe don't know how, as far as getting involved in civics and the government process, and obviously just trying to unite people. I see it as a principles over politics type of program. We obviously lean more conservative, but I think most people do whenever they look back and they start to tie things to the way that our founding fathers set things up originally. So, and we were talking about this in our men's group tonight. We live in one of the, well, some people would say the most conservative state in the country. We are in probably the most conservative county in the state, and then here in Pearl, Brandon, Flowood area, probably the three most conservative cities in that county in the state.
Yeah.
And we were saying how even if you filled up, every church to the brim, that still left, I don't remember, from, I think we even talked about this in church, like 80 something thousand people that were still left to reach, to kind of get involved, not just in church, but in their government, and kind of involved in the process and in the system. I know in Rankin County in our last election, you knew we saw like less than 10% turnout,
Yeah.
which is honestly pretty sad. Just because, especially now, we see such a pull back and forth, and I see people kind of really getting split again over the school choice thing. They're like, well, you see the teachers against the parents, and it's kind of like, should there be that divide? Like, shouldn't And then here we are arguing about the legislator making these decisions, and it's like, well, there and go again. Like, are people not involved as they should have? If they were more involved, would those legislators be making the decisions the way they want them to? And then it's like, well, who's right? Is it the people for school choice? Is it the people against school choice? So, rather than have the back and forth, and we'll definitely talk about the back and forth, we'll talk about the pros, the cons, a little bit about that. But, I feel like it's important to just really just try to identify it. I mean, for me, honestly, that's just where I try to see it. I'm like, all right, how is this biblical? How is this, what are
Yeah.
the principles behind this? The people making these decisions, like, look at their history, look at their past. Not necessarily their past, but just, the stuff that they've been doing while they've been in office. And
Hmm.
how all these things tie back to the good book, how these things
Yeah.
tie back to scripture. and then try to make our decision from there because I feel like that's at least the safest way we could do that. I know we all,
Absolutely.
I guess we could say, probably from a teacher standpoint, it's probably, like I'm an educator, I'm a teacher. Like this is all I know. I know that the public school, um, you know, program has, been around. Like, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then obviously the parent side of it. And then, like I said, I'll just try to pull out, how this kind of ties back. But going back to merge again, just an overall agenda, real quick. We were labeled, and we're trying to brand ourselves, obviously, as kind of the Magnolia State's new powerhouse movement, aligned with CCMS. Dedicated to uniting Mississippians, defending the welfare of the nation, and starting right here at home in Mississippi. So we're calling on people to help build a network. Obviously, that network's going to honor faith, family, and freedom. We talked about that at our last meeting, and just kind of making those the pillars of what we're about. So everything that we're doing is just, hey, how does this tie back to faith? How does this tie back to representing our family? And how does this tie back to representing freedom? The whole goal is to empower our generation, the younger generation, the 18 to 35-year-olds, because that's the ones moving up. Y'all are
Yeah.
y'all. I say y'all. Man, y'all. It's the next generation that's going to be in charge per se. So we're trying to do that with an unfiltered truth. Just kind of in a world, in a country, in a state kind of full of spin right now. So, we're aiming to become uh, Mississippi's, leading movement for that freedom fight.
Yeah.
Through high impact channels, by using YouTube, by using Facebook. We've got some great traction. We've got a lot of stuff planned for this upcoming year. But the whole point is to deliver truth, information, that the kind of the current generation demands. Not trying to put spin on it. We'll listen to both sides, but just like we have on our page, real conservative firepower, by helping mobilize young people like yourself, all the others around you, and also communities, just around biblical values and faith centered leadership. I think that's what it's all about. Faith, family priority, liberty in Christ, and just how we align all those principles. One of my favorite quotes, Galatians, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And that's kind of, it's a countering culture of political challenges, I think, where we have to foster stewardship and we have to foster justice and really foster a truth in government. And it's hard to do that nowadays. So like I said, that's why we try to bring everything back. And really, we're going to leverage these platforms the best we can to spread that message, to engage Mississippians daily, weekly, the best we can, talk about the things that, people don't want to talk about, and, maybe some things that people don't want to hear. But nobody else is doing that. I think you have news channels and publications and that talk about it, but they're always leaning one way or the other. And while we may lean a little bit more right, I say that it's right versus wrong. It's not necessarily right versus left. And when we can pull all that together, people just kind of align where I think that, the good Lord kind of intended us to. But some of the things that we have planned for this year, we obviously are trying to get some events across the state going. Some of the local chapters of CCMS have been doing that for years. So we're just trying to boost the energy behind that, get more people mobilized, get more people engaged, inspire some action there, and then, just connect people face to face too. Um, but some of the additional things that we'll be doing is providing some resources to students. Obviously, My Generation Now initiative is kind of a thing that we talked about in ways to get involved. And like I said, an overall biblical focus. So at its heart, it's grassroots, it's faith driven. It's an effort to kind of reclaim, Mississippi values, and amid all these national battles that we see going on. We'll talk a little bit about that and Trump and Venezuela and kind of what happened there. And again, we'll tie that back to kind of a biblical perspective. So next thing that I kind of want to talk about, as we get into it a little bit more, is just kind of the outreach part of it. It's not just activism; it's a call for believers, to be salt and light. Starting locally and then hopefully to impact nationally, and that's kind of the idea. Is to get people to support the movement, support their faith, support family, support freedom, And like I said, to do that with a, biblical principle focus right here in Mississippi first. So that's kind of the point behind merge, is just kind of like, hey, we're just trying to get everybody together, to do it, not our way, but the one way the good Lord intended, and hopefully we can pull something from that. Core truth, I think, about discussing politics and religion, isn't always about winning arguments, and isn't always about party labels, but I think about, like I said earlier, about preserving, just those foundational principles that help shape, our country, and freedom and justice, human dignity. And, Scripture commands that. It says that we have to train
Yeah.
up the next generation in truth. And, when we stop teaching that connection, I think that we risk losing, that very foundation that kind of made, the West and America,
Yeah,
possible
and
in
that's not
general.
just true in politics. That's true in life. Is we always
Exactly.
see that the more that society and the more that the West, the more that America has drifted away from God, the more corrupt and the more destructive this country has become. In the sense that poverty rates have gone up, crime has gone up, violent crime has gone up, depression has gone up. Mental illnesses. All of these things that used to not be a problem, and then even after, modern medicine discoveries still weren't a problem, we have seen them become a problem the more that society has drifted from God. And that is one of the larger ideas that we want to help, make people realize, is that if you really want to accomplish something in America, you have to turn back to God.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Um, it's definitely, an understanding that we've gotten away from that in our schools. Unfortunately, even in some of our churches that have just become watered down.
Mhm.
In our government that is, I think leading a lot of people where they feel like they aren't represented by, officials and elected officials that
Yeah,
are.
you were talking about that earlier. Is that once people thought Trump got elected, they didn't have to engage anymore. But I always subscribed to the idea, and I always tried to tell people is that your work has really only just begun. Getting him elected was the easy part.
That's
Enacting
right.
his agenda and the conservative agenda that we believe in, that's going to be the hard part. And we've seen that he has done just about everything he can that an executive order and the Constitution allows him to do. Congress is the one that has to step up and truly enact his laws if they want to be permanent and have a lasting impact on America. And that's why people need to stay engaged, hold their representatives accountable, both at the federal and at the state level, so that his agenda that they voted for and we worked so hard to get in there so that he could do it, so that it actually happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that Congress, it's that Senate that is supposed to, represent the people that people feel like they're further and further away from. It seems like we've kind of redefined morality and just kind of the authority of what's going on, and that has caused the country, and even in our state, to kind of drift into this, confusion, like you said earlier, and silence allows corruptness to flow. So what we're trying to do is have those principal discussions, and help equip people to discern right from wrong, like I said, in the laws, the policies, and the leadership that we have. So, we're able to make, better informed decisions about the people that we elect. I think it's a part of what we're supposed to do. Our founders knew that liberty just kind of resets. I'm sorry, rests on virtues, and our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people, like plain and simple. I think John Adams said that, and our founding fathers had to take oaths of, that proclaimed that they were Christians, that they were involved in the church, and, um, it's a call to prayer. It's a call to the Constitution. It's a call to, invoking divine guidance. I feel like when we stray away from that, it's just kind of like we're doing it on our own. And so long, I think that, we've just strayed further and further into that, where the biblical echoes have just kind of gone away, and now it's just silence. It's just man just kind of, do trying to do it on its own, and not really paying attention, to understanding what protects us from tyranny, and, from government overreach, and from kind of just cultural decay in general. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, we're I think we're at a point where, we have to have these discussions and continue those discussions. I know that was a lot of the big talk last year was, how do we continue to have these discussions? Because the next generation is watching. The next generation is learning. My kids are watching. They're asking questions now. They're getting a little bit older, and if we don't teach them that freedom and that limited government, the personal responsibility and all that just kind of flows from within,
Mhm.
and that we have to have this, biblical worldview, and these ideologies will just kind of fill the void of that. It's going to be hard for them, especially whenever they get older and they grow up, to really understand what's what. And I think that that's just kind of the enemy that's really just trying to blur it even more.
Yeah,
And I think, when
and I
righteousness
think the
is found.
devil is I think the devil is absolutely I think that is his plan. Is that he's
Mhm.
trying to, sort of camouflage himself, to disguise himself as a peaceful, church, that love is love, and tolerance and judgment is the greatest sin that a human can commit. But Charlie Kirk said this, and it's absolutely true: is that the greatest sin you commit is blasphemy of the Holy Spirit and of our
Mhm.
Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. That is the greatest sin you can commit, not judgment. The easiest way to convince people into to stray them from God is to convince yourself that you are God. And that is why we
Mhm.
see other religions and pseudo Christianity it becomes so popular, is because it has all the same, appeals as true Christianity, but you don't have to practice it in order to be a part of it. And that's why it's
Yeah.
so appealing to human nature.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time at church, and I love our church because our pastor kind of says it like it is. It's like we pick and choose the things in the Bible that we want to, adhere to, but then there's parts of it that we're just like, maybe not so much, and maybe we're talking it and we're acting it out in public, but it's like, what are we doing behind closed doors? What are we doing in these offices whenever the people aren't watching? And that's what we've kind of come to, when righteousness fades from public life, and from the church, and from the government, the nation suffers, and it's kind of where we are. So I think, again, that's why principles, over parties is super important right now. I think having a higher standard, a lot of people don't want to talk politics or pick sides, but we're trying to discuss principles, hold every side accountable, and just bring it back to biblical values, and just kind of why we must obey God rather than men. And you're right, you said it great. We think we are God, and we think that we know better, and there's no justice, for the vulnerable. There's no justice for honest government. Um, and then talking about these things publicly, I hope is my goal. I was having a lunch with somebody the other day, and I said, at the very end, and hopefully out of all this, is that some of these elected officials, some of these people, whoever, I said, even if it's just us and talking to a camera 10 years from now with nobody listening, I said, at the very least, my kids are going to understand that. But hopefully, excuse me, it's going to remind these leaders that, and citizens alike, that ultimately authority rests with God, not with us. And this is again a call to action for MERS Mississippi, and kind of what we're doing. Our mission, again, to unite, around faith and family and freedom, like I said. But it starts boldly. It starts by having those conversations. So that's what we're going to do. Remind the next generation, just kind of that the American experiment, and self government was launched on biblical soil. It wasn't launched on the soil that we put in. It was already there, and when we return to that, I think when we return to that in public life, not through coercion, but through principled living and truthful conversation, we can actually help preserve some of that. And like I said, at the very least for our kids. So let's keep talking. We'll talk more about these principles, and then the politics, and just kind of how the Magnolia State can hopefully lead the way back to greatness, man. Back to how it should be, and kind of what this was all built upon. So we'll lead us right into the next big thing that we're seeing for 2027. We're still a year out. It's obviously the election for governor is set for November 2nd, 2027. So it's still pretty early, pre campaign, if you will. No major new announcements to my knowledge. Obviously Governor Tate Reeves is term limited. He can't run again after this term. So we're seeing just kind of the landscape, especially on the Republican primary, really focus on two people. It's kind of crowded as far as some of the people that we've heard rumors about, but there's several high profile people that are kind of maybe positioning themselves. But obviously the two main ones, Andy Gibson, we talked about him earlier, Shad White, both have been over the conservative coalition. I think they know and they understand just kind of that little divide and kind of that little split that we were talking about amongst the GOP and the Republicans and the establishment and the conservatives, and they realize how important it is that they get these people on their side. Simply because I mean we see that they're conservative guys and they're running on these family built platforms, these government policies that are conservative. And we'll talk about Andy Gibson a little bit. Obviously, Commissioner of Agriculture and Commerce. He was the first one to formally announce. But his
Mhm.
whole thing is faith centered. Positive future. He spoke at CCMS a couple months ago. Great talk. He emphasizes conservative leadership, hard work, and trusting God. I mean, that was a big part of his thing. He was super Maha, make America healthy again, and just kind of reiterated his plans and positioned himself, like I said, not as kind of an outsider of the Jackson establishment. I think
Mhm.
fundraising looked pretty low last time I looked on his side, so that says a lot. You got to have, unfortunately, money to play that game in Mississippi. But he may be a testament to where that's not exactly the case all the time. Shad White, obviously state auditor, he announced, I think December, was it last year? Officially, maybe sooner than that actually. But
He hasn't officially announced yet.
okay. So he's been
He's hinted at it. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but he hasn't made an official announcement yet.
he's from my understanding, he's been probably pretty aggressively fundraising. I think
Oh,
but
he's number one in the state for fundraising for
yeah,
state officials.
and that says a lot too. It's kind of, but again, it's like, does that rub people in the wrong way, or does that just show that he has more support? You can make either argument, but I like what he does, what he has to say. He's obviously for fiscal accountability, anti-corruption. He's done a lot in his role as auditor. Just kind of, putting some things out there, man. I really do enjoy what the guy does. I mean, like, he's not scared to
Mhm.
call these people out. And
He's taken on the establishment right to its face. I mean, he took up whenever the welfare fraud and all that stuff was being found out at Southern Miss. I mean, he took on Brett Favre, Phil Bryant. He wasn't scared to do that. And in fact, after he did it, he won his election by even more than he did the first time. So I'd like to point that out.
yeah, and we see that I think that started last week actually. That whole case is now in court. So we'll see what kind of turns out about that. Super sad that that was going on, but that just goes to show, I mean, that's what, 50 something million, I think.
I think
That was just kind of
70 million, something like that. Yeah.
that was just kind of redirected for crap, if you will. I think dude was getting paid like 30 grand a week to be a motivational speaker to folks that were making like 30 and 40,000 a year. So it's kind of a slap in the face, and it just goes back to say, who's really overseeing these things and why aren't they overseeing it better? Um,
Yeah.
and just kind of why is this waste and fraud and corruption even happening in our state? So I appreciate him for that, because it's you definitely get a target on your back whenever you start calling those people out, when you start you know not just calling them out but tracing the money back and possibly putting people in jail. So he's definitely going to be one of the guys that is going to be making some people uncomfortable for the upcoming year, and the time being is he's showing that he's not afraid to kind of fight back against it. But Andy Gibson is also trying to put himself in that same category of like, hey, look, I'm not that establishment either. I'm for the families. I'm for the farmers. I'm for protecting your land. I'm for making your food healthier. I'm for making sure that there's less government overreach for protecting your land. So, I mean, I wish we could have two governors. I'd like to have both of them in there. Maybe a governor and a
Yeah.
lieutenant governor.
Well,
I think they'd make a good team.
yeah, I was about to say, I wish one of them could run for lieutenant governor. I will say this about Andy Gibson, though, and this is something that made the conservative coalition or some of its members unhappy. Is the whole last year in session we had a pesticide bill that went through that would have essentially made it where there's only two pesticide companies that dominated Mississippi, and they're both big ag. And Andy Gibson did change his opinion and side with big ag on that last year. Shad White doesn't have something like that that taints his record, but I still think they're both solid candidates.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely a hard one, and I agree. It definitely, it's. I think you'd have to dig more into that to really see what the details were, but it doesn't look great whenever it's because I think part of that was you not being able to sue pesticide companies if you were harmed by some of the chemicals that they're putting in food. So it kind of makes you wonder, kind of makes you look at it a little bit more, but spotlight and the magnifying glass is definitely on these two guys. Some of the other likely
Hmm.
considering contenders that we've seen, Lieutenant Governor, Delbert Hosemann. Um, yeah, hopefully not, but I'll say it. But he's frequently mentioned as probably a top tier candidate. I don't think he's going to. I think but he's got some strong establishment ties. We know that he can definitely try to leverage some things. He's obviously been presiding over the Senate, so that gives him a lot of power there too. So that power leads off to those congressmen, those senators, and they go back to their constituents and kind of push votes that way. And that's just kind of how that thing works. It's kind of what leadership says. Neither one of Andy Gibson or Shad are really in that position. Um, that I think they have that leverage of Hoseman, unfortunately. But I think that's why they're going after it from different angles. Andy's kind of going at it for like I'm for the people, and Shad's kind of going at like I'm for the people's money. So it's they're both great angles. They both have really good platforms. I'd be happy with either one. I haven't really quite decided yet. It's a lot's gonna come out. Time will tell. Attorney General Lynn Finch. She's also been kind of talked about as a potential entrant. I think that would add another statewide name with some conservative credentials. She's done some good work over there at the Attorney General's office. I will say that they kind of oversee a lot of the a lot of the family issues going on with the foster care system. That's a big thing in our household that we're really involved with. So, I appreciate some of that work just on a personal level. Billionaire businessman Tommy Duff. I heard he's exploring to run kind of. He's got the money behind it. That's he's been networking. I think we saw him at Neshoba County Fair. Um, some other names I've
Yeah,
heard.
he's going to have
Speaker,
some problems with his ties to
a lot of things.
DEI at Ole Miss. That's going to be where he has his biggest troubles.
Yeah, and it really,
So,
no offense to Ole Miss, but I mean they're just kind of they've been kind of living in that world for a while anyways, just with a lot of the
mhm.
people that they've had in their administration, teachers, professors, excuse me, that have just kind of been pushing some very questionable things over there, and then just kind of the influence that obviously they have over their students. So I think that you're right, that's definitely going to be a concern if it's brought to light. But I think I think they're really just I think they just keep their name in there, honestly. Some of these people just for clout, just say, oh, I might because I can. And they're really it's it takes some cash to do this, so I think they're going to have to really think about that. Former Speaker Philip Gunn, I've heard his name come up. I heard, former U.S. Representative Greg Harper. I heard his name come up. Then I've also heard tech entrepreneur Gerard Gibbert's name come up as well. So I think a lot of these people are going to wait until probably after the legislative session is over to really stick their nose in it or throw their hat in the ring. I don't think any of the Democratic candidates have really emerged prominently yet. No word from anybody really in the primary that's likely to decide. It's probably going to be Mississippi GOP dominant, I think. And then I think the activity has been kind of quiet since last year. So like I said, I think now that the session is going on, we'll probably see some more come up after that's over, um, which will kind of lead us into the next segment and kind of topic of just what's going on right now. Obviously, school choice bill, but polling for the governor's race. Let's see, on a 2025 group poll, showed high undecided among like 42% among Republicans, with single digits for early names. So, but I think I saw where Shad and Andy, like I said, were just up there. I think I saw Shad doing fairly well. And then also again with fundraising, endorsements, and just kind of their legislative records and what they have going on, they're both going to be throwing in what they've done, and what they plan to do. And so we'll just tie that back to just again local values, just faith, fiscal responsibility, and family focused policies. I think Gibson's emphasis on God centered leadership just really aligns with biblical stewardship, and themes we've discussed. But the field could widen, and I think Shad's ability to go after these people committing fraud and corruption also aligns on a biblical perspective. So, like I said, I like both these guys. I wish both of them the best. I think that it's going to be a tight one for sure. But you'll see some interesting things happen in the upcoming year. So that kind of leads me into one of the things that we talked about last week was just a post that Senator Chris McDaniel made, and just talking about. I was going to leave this to them, but I think it just kind of makes sense to talk about it now. He made a post that just kind of, in essence, it was just like, all right, people, you need to stop complaining or don't complain, because, we keep electing the same guys in office. We keep getting the same results, and then we're tired, or upset or complain about, what's going on and the way things are. And he said he was going to ruffle some feathers with it, and he probably did. But I mean, for me, it's like he's right, and I think you probably see that too. It's like he's right. Like
Yeah.
if we're not getting involved, we're not getting engaged. We have less than 10% turnout. Like, you're not gonna, we can't sit back 95% of the year, and then 5% of the year we're all of a sudden we care about what's going on, and then we're sitting there wondering like why things are the way they are. Like, why are they voting this way on school choice? Why are they doing that? Well, we're not getting involved. We're not engaged like we should. Unfortunately, I think it just ties back to what we were saying earlier, is just that we are so mixed up in this world, and just kind of all the stuff on social media, just these things that pull us away from what's actually important, that we see these things working behind the scenes, and the next thing you know, they're law. Next thing you know, they're actually affecting us. And now all of a sudden we care. Now all of a sudden people are saying, well, vote him out, vote him out. And then the election comes up and nobody gets out to vote. So he kind of did ruffle some feathers, I think, by just saying that. And, telling people like you get what you deserve. Like, not necessarily you get what you deserve, but I mean you get what you put in. And if you're not putting in anything, you're gonna get that. You're gonna get it turned back on you. And I think that kind of
Yeah.
ties back to Trump, and like you are getting what you voted in. For the most part, I try to look at it. Look, I worked for Rubio on his campaign when he ran and Trump ran the first time. Um, I did vote for Trump the second go around, and I was looking at it like, I try to look at it from a, once they're in, like, okay, like we're not going to look at it from like super candidate absorbed now. Let's look at what they're doing, and I mean, you see things that are just kind of significantly better, but obviously there's things that happen like outside that the media just kind of turns into a bigger deal, that they try to push against one person. And then again, we're still not paying attention to what our local representatives are doing. But, I think he was a good
Yeah.
example of, if you're really, if people paid as much attention as they did whenever they were engaged in that election, like we saw what we got. Like we got the result. We see these policies, we see these things he's doing around the world. We see them for the most part, I think, to be pretty good. I'm not saying he's perfect. I don't agree with him on everything, but I mean, I feel like it's not been a too
Yeah.
bad of a job. And I mean, I feel like this dude's gonna, actually looking out for Americans. He's actually looking out for the country. He's looking out for us abroad. He's pulling people like Rubio in.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I guess that was a pretty good decision
Yeah.
on back in the day because,
Well,
it makes
he
sense.
has made this, and I've been able to. Yeah, and I've been able to. It's been sort of weird. I grew up. I was super young whenever Obama was president, and then the older I got in grade school and middle school, I first years of Trump, and then God bless me, I lived through 4 years of Biden. We all did, and I sort of grow up and seeing how Trump has changed the Republican Party. And I was growing up, I always heard from my parents and just other conversations is Republicans were just super classy and country club Republicans is what they were called, and sort of elitist is was their mindset. But Trump came in and he brought this whole new coalition of Republican voters, whether that be minorities like Hispanics and African American men, or the blue collar workers. He broke that blue wall in Pennsylvania, Michigan. Ohio was even a swing state whenever 2016
Hmm.
came around. Wisconsin, and it's just he brought in that new wave because he understood that the Republican Party sometimes had good intentions, but it's whenever he brought in conservative populism that it was really going to take fire and light a fire in people, which saw him get the most votes that a Republican has ever got in a presidential election 2 times in a row.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We definitely saw. I mean, that's what I thought was neat. I talk to my wife about all the time, and you see whenever a country, I think that is, you know, majority Christian that believes in God, that is behind those things, like gets behind something, like, and then good things kind of come out of it. Like you have to assume that the right decisions were made. That we're not not everybody's going to be happy. You're going to make some people mad. Not everybody can win. If there was 100 people voting, like somebody's going to be mad. Somebody's not going to be happy about it. But it's like if you can like drop your stuff for a minute and drop your pride for a minute and say, okay, how is this actually better? Like, is this actually doing anything? Um, border policy and stuff like that. I mean, I was talking about it from somebody with, a Hispanic background. I'm like, look, I get it. Like, I'm not mad at it. Like, I understand. Like, Biden was, we opened the border and he was literally importing like the next set of voters for the next 4 years. And I said that like, a long time ago. And sure enough, now it's back
Yeah.
to, hey, we got to get it out of here because the same thing's happening. And now we see this kind of all these
Hmm.
things happen across the country with Islam, cities that don't look the same anymore, policies and people in New York, it's concerning. And so I don't look at that as a bad thing. I look at it as like, it's you're not going to make everybody happy, but when you have more people in the pot that are screaming, this is wrong,
Yeah.
this is wrong, this is wrong,
Well,
other
and
people are
that
going to
as
start to
well
look
is
at it like
that
that.
like it isn't the tough. Some of the toughest decisions, yeah, some of the toughest decisions don't make people happy, and
Mhm.
because making people happy doesn't all isn't always the right thing to do. I mean, you could give your kid a bunch of candy for dinner, but that's probably not the best decision for him, and he might not be happy about it.
Mm.
But I mean, like you said, I mean, Biden opened the border, but Trump has taken just securing the border to a whole nother level where he's actually we had a net loss in migration for the first time in I don't know how many years in the United States of America in 2025. So over 600, almost 700,000 people were deported by ICE, but another 1.9 million self-deported. And I think that's one of the most successful policies that the administration has implemented because it saves us money because we don't have to deploy ICE to go deal with that. And people want to make the argument all the time that ICE is inhumane and all this and all that. Well, no. What is inhumane is ignoring the laws of the United States of America and subjecting millions of Americans who are looking for jobs, looking for hope, to have those dreams undercut by cheap foreign labor. Importing millions of Americans, even some who want to achieve the American dream, they only make it harder on themselves to achieve that dream the more of them that come in because it raises housing prices, it raises prices at the grocery store, and it limits the job market. When our ancestors thought that their rights were being taken away by the crown, they started a revolution and created the greatest nation this earth has ever seen. It is not America's job to fix the world's problems. They need to fix their own problems, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean that's a good lead into the next thing. I mean, but we even see Trump, kind of I think taking a big swing in some of these other countries. I mean, we saw what happened in Venezuela, and that's kind of what was on the list to talk about next. Um, what happened over there, like we saw, some crazy things going on over there. And nobody was paying attention, I think, before this. Nobody was paying attention to just that this country went from like flourishing in the 50s and 60s, sitting on all this oil, like all these reserves. They were doing really good. And then, come the 90s, like things started to decline, 2000s, like, I mean, it was just back to tyranny. It was back to, a dictator that didn't want to give up power. It was, people in the military, people in the government that were basically a cartel and working with the cartel, importing drugs to the United States, sending criminals, sending murderers over here. I mean, it was, people don't want to pay attention to that stuff, but I mean, there's a change. Um, and if we don't have somebody like that, and it's not just him. I mean, you hear Secretary of State Rubio talking about it all the time, where it's like, hey, look, this was a problem, and that's somebody else that comes from Hispanic background that's saying the same thing. That's like, hey, look, these places, people didn't want to leave per se, just because they wanted to leave. Like people were leaving because they were under, a dictator. They were living in a place that was not that great. People could not get food. They had no rights. They were getting thrown in jail if they said anything about it. Like it wasn't a great place. So, for him to take some action over there, I think was a good thing. Um, there's a lot of aspects that tie into it. Some people talk about the oil move, some people talk about the China move. But Delcy Rodriguez is just kind of one of the people that has emerged as kind of one of the de facto leaders of Venezuela, and Trump's called her a terrific person. As far as going into the conversation of what could come out of that country, just as far as making life better for people over there, such as the trade, the minerals, like I said, the security. People want to go home. People want to live in their country. People don't want to have to go to a whole new place and start all the way over. And once they get here, they may realize, hey, it's not actually that great all the time. We have high taxes. We have a lot of things that could be better as well. So I think that it wasn't obviously just a negative thing, but he's posted positively just kind of about the relationship and the partnership over there that's been going on. And like I said, the oil and economic moves, he signed an executive order just kind of safeguarding the oil revenues in the United States, and accounts from seizure. So it's kind of framing it as a kind of a protective stability and advancing America first goals. I'm reconnecting. I don't know if I'm disconnected right now or not.
Yeah, I can barely hear you. It's like cutting in and out. Technology makes everything so enjoyable. Well, I guess Chris is left and he's going to try to come back.
All right, I think
Might
we're
be.
back on now. So yeah, like we were saying, Trump's kind of in the United States kind of framing as an America First goals. Obviously trying to curb the migration, curb the narcotics. all the negative things that were coming out of there. And just really seeing it as not necessarily seizing um Venezuela just for the heck of it, but as a part of protecting American interests. We've seen some prisoners released. We've seen Venezuela releasing some of the political prisoners, including some Americans, which we've also seen kind of as a win. So it's kind of leading them to kind of possibly do some more strikes in that area and really pushing a lot of the stuff that's coming out of Central America, a lot of these drugs, a lot of the cartel that's working out of there. It's really seen as a U.S. influence, post Maduro, if you will. But some of the criticisms, I think have been that it violates international law, that it's just kind of an oil grab, that it's used to exaggerate claims about drugs and migration, which obviously I don't think has been exaggerated at all. I think we have seen an influx of drugs and migration. Obviously, probably some not good people that have come to the United States because of that. Don't get me wrong; a lot of these people are good people, but like I said, a lot of those good people came because they were just living in a bad place. So, Russia, I think, has condemned the action as well. They're obviously trying to say that this is not a good thing. They're obviously not going to agree with us. But I think some of the justification in Endgame is going to eventually come back to some congressional intervening there and just kind of what they see is what that's supposed to look like. So, are you still there?